All right. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world and joining us today. My name is Aditya, and I'm batch of PGP 12, 2010 pass out, and I currently work for Amazon in London. I've been with Amazon for 6.5 years and here in London for 4 years. Now, this year is my batch's 10th anniversary of passing out, and I was definitely looking forward to going back to campus, spending some time with my batchmates, and reliving that whole campus life. But unfortunately, COVID happened. While travel plans look bleak for now, this opportunity to host or moderate a talk show came along, and it is indeed my pleasure and an absolute honor to be hosting this edition of Careers in E-commerce. I want to start by quickly thanking the IMK Alumni Association. I think you guys are doing a fantastic job of bringing this whole thing together. It is so relevant for people in campus, people who've passed out in various stages of their careers. I also want to especially mention a couple of folks who have told me not to mention their names, but Ronald, Namit, and Rohit Koshi, you guys have done a lot of work, and I'm sure there are a lot more people working in the backstage, but you've been exposed to me, and thanks for your efforts in recruiting panel members, helping us design and frame the 60, 90-minute session with all the relevant and useful topics. Now, e-commerce has definitely gotten popular in the last few years as a career option. When I look back at the IMK alumni network, I can't think of a single batch that does not have someone working in the e-commerce space across profiles, across organizations and locations. The task of choosing a panel is that much more difficult. But we've got a star cast panel today, guys. FMCG experts, mix of entrepreneurs, product owners, data scientists, e-commerce veterans, name it, and you've got it in today's panel. What makes this even more special for me is I personally know a number of these folks. I've seen their careers evolve. I've been in discussions with them as they jumped into this e-commerce bandwagon a few years ago, thinking, is this the right move to make, Aditya? And it's great to have this conversation 6, 8, 10 years later. I feel really privileged. Now, before I get into my specific session and have a more detailed conversation, I want to remind you folks there are a couple of other videos that have referenced e commerce careers. The careers in product management, Manjunath Talwa from Flipkart, Colin, careers in supply chain. You guys should definitely go and also have a look at some of those videos for a slightly more holistic perspective. What do we have for today then? We are definitely going to talk through why e-commerce, even if it's brief, we'll touch upon why e-commerce, also the financially rewarding part, definitely. How to get in, whether you're in campus, whether you're somewhere in the mid phase of your career, how does one get into e-commerce? What sort of roles are there? What sort of opportunities? How do you leverage your network and so on? What does career progression look like within e-commerce? What skills do you hone? How are these going to be useful? And then what are the exit options? What does one do after a career in e-commerce? What sort of roles do you look for? What sort of startups can you possibly get into? And finally, a fun rapid fire round. So that's what we've got packed. I know we've earmarked roughly between 60 to maybe 90 minutes, depending on how this conversation goes. We'll go through some of the feedback and see where we land. Now, rather than introduce each panel member first and then get the question, I thought I'll start with asking everybody a question, and I'll also introduce them in a one-liner. So the question that they're going to answer is, please tell us why you would encourage someone to consider a career in e-commerce. And I'm going to start with Sumit first. So Sumit, if you can come and share your reason for why someone should consider a career in e-commerce. And just for the viewers then, Sumit is 2006 PGP 8. He's the guru of analytics and data science. A quick glance at his LinkedIn profile will tell us he's had a career in analytics. He's currently the senior director for Walmart and based in California.
Thanks, Aditya. Hey, everyone, this is Sumit. To answer this question, like if you just look at this from the frame of reference of demand and supply, this is one of the few industries where the demand for talent is growing exponentially, while the supply is still struggling to keep pace. So, as you all know, that's always a good situation to be in, right? At the same time, it's an extremely competitive and dynamic industry. You can accomplish a lot in a very short time and see the results of your efforts fairly quickly. So, which always, again, right, like as very redeeming. Now, the skills that you acquire are again highly transferable. first of all, in the adjacent industries, depending upon your role. So, for example, tech, obviously, marketplaces, CPG, direct to consumer, consulting, etc. Right, and pretty much every industry, right? Like it pretty much is going to become a horizontal layer. So every company will have to figure out how to be an e-commerce player. It's just a matter of when, not if. And lastly, COVID, that has been a huge accelerator for e-commerce, where years of change played out in a matter of months. Online grocery being a prime example of that. And just like we say, every company will eventually be a tech company. Every company will be forced to figure out their e-commerce strategy to stay relevant. Thanks, Aditya.
Awesome, Sumit. Thank you. I'm going to bring Manash next. Now, Manash is 2008 pass out, PGP 10. He is the guru of product management. He's currently the e-commerce head for product management and product design at PepsiCo, based in New York.
Thank you, Aditya. It's really fun to be part of this panel, and great to be talking to fellow alums from IMK. So it's a very relevant question. I think the answer is in threefold: growth, consumer relevance, and career trajectory. Right. So in terms of growth, right? So e-commerce as a space is seeing huge amount of growth, right? So if you look at Instacart, right? In 2020, they achieved their 2025 goals, right? So they have achieved like 4x the kind of volume that they were doing last year. Similarly, with Amazon, with Flipkart, with across the different direct-to-consumer retailers, B2B, we are seeing huge amount of growth across broad and across geography, right? So that is one of the key reasons, because I always feel that your growth in your career is also driven by which industry and which role that you take, right? So that's number one thing. And the second is consumer, right? You have to be in an industry or in a role which is relevant to the consumers. And right now, e-commerce is extremely relevant for the consumers, right? Whatever they do, right? Whether you are shopping for groceries, or you're shopping for a car, or you're shopping for a house, what do you typically use? Digital channels, right? The relevance on stores is reducing every single day, right? You see a lot of stores in let's take the context of North America, right? You see a lot of stores closing for Macy's. You see a lot of stores closing for Sears. Whereas e-commerce as a growth channel is increasing across both, right? Both from niche brands as well as large companies, right? So hence it's extremely relevant for the consumers. And the third is your career growth trajectory. I think Sumit touched upon on it a little bit, right? E-commerce is also a space where people are moving to different career sets, right? People who are in supply chains, who are in marketing, who are in consumer engagement, right? They are trying to figure out how do they stay relevant in this space, and what kind of career choices do we make, right? So that's why you see people who are traditionally in brand design going into product design, right? People who are traditionally in supply chain, who are in domain expert in supply chain, let's say consultant, domain expert in supply chain, they are moving into product roles and trying to explore how do they build those technology stacks, right? So those are the three reasons that I find e-commerce extremely exciting and relevant for the current audience.
Awesome, Manash. I can definitely relate to that. When I joined Amazon, I remember, and I'm sure Smrithi will vouch for this as well, but I remember I came in from ITC, and we were struggling to hit our goals. And every week I would have these very difficult conversations with my RSM and NSM. In Amazon, I hit I think my annual goal in the first 6 months. And then we redefined our goals, and that was smashed in the next 3 months. And like you say, that sort of growth in business is always very closely related to career progression as well. Absolutely. Thank you for that insight, Manash. All right, who do I bring in next then? So I'll bring in Ashish next. Ashish Sinha is a batchmate, PGP 12. He's had a variety of experience, starting with Snapdeal. He went to Vardy. He went on to join Souk. Couldn't stay away from Amazon quickly, so he orchestrated the entire Souk Amazon coalition. He's currently the senior business development manager in EMEA for startups with Amazon Web Services. But Ashish, let's get your perspective.
Great. Thanks, Aditya. Thanks for introducing. And it's a great pleasure to speak with all of you. I definitely concur with what Sumit and Manash was talking about. On top of that, basically, I can additionally put three more merits to the industry, which are basically the long-term growth outlook, not only at a personal level, but at a professional level as well. This industry basically let you be the real business head, effectively meaning that right off the bat, right at the beginning of your career, you are exposed to not only, let's say, one vertical which you work with. In addition to that, you work with so many other divisions so that you can own that entire piece of your own. And the third is basically the access to real-time results. So it's traditionally seen that whenever you experiment or do some project work, it takes months to see the real-time impact. However, in this vertical, in this industry, you experiment, you learn, you fail fast, you unlearn, you implement all these things in a very controlled environment with real-time impact, which you can see, tweak the project and move ahead. So definitely it's a thrill which also goes on.
Again, I can so relate to this. It was not. It was not after my first week at Amazon where I was handed something pretty meaty, and I had a quick glance to say, this thing is going to impact a number of customers. Are you guys sure? I've not even spent a week, and they were like, that's how this works, right? I mean, you got to crack on. But I think the pleasure that comes out of it, the adrenaline drive that comes out of it is just unparalleled. So thanks again, Ashish. Very useful. Smrithi and I go back a long way. Similar internship. We both joined ITC. She's currently an absolute rock star at Flipkart. A variety of roles: category marketing, seller profiles. She's currently the head of payments, including commercial lending and insurance. So, Smrithi, let's have your perspective.
Thank you, Aditya, for the kind words. Actually, Manash and Ashish sort of, took away the answer that I had prepared in my mind for this, right? But I would say, as Aditya said, right, the adrenaline rush is immense, right? And if you look at it, it's as much as, in a sense, if you have to put it in the right reference, it is the mental agility that you're able to develop over a period of time, right? It's certainly a career that, for people who want to develop that constant mental agility, it is for those kind of people, right? Let me just give you one data point, and that would summarize, right? In 9 years, e-commerce has grown by 10,000 times, at least in India, because Manash and Ashish have taken a few bits of my answer. Let me at least put in the India perspective here, right? It takes a lot for an industry to develop by 10,000 times over 9 years, that at least that I have seen, right? Over the last 9 years, the move from a retail model to a marketplace model, monolithic architecture of systems to multi-tenant and extensible systems, right? Usage of advanced data sciences on retail, on ads, on fintech, on logistics, right? Moving from owning the kirana, owning the logistics space, let's say Flipkart did that with e-cart, for instance, right? To alternative delivery models using kirana. All of these, and now hyperlocal is the new big thing, right? All of these really require one to constantly rethink and unlearn every 2 years, every 3 years, right? What you've done and move on to the next model, right? It's a lot of excitement. It is a lot, unless you have that passion for solving for the consumer, right? And if you have that, it's a great career.
Absolutely, Smrithi. I'm frequently asked this question: what do you love about e-commerce? And I keep telling people, it's the customer experience, right? I mean, 2 years ago, or at least when I joined Amazon, I still was very wary about putting my credit card details online. That's now become the norm. Cash on delivery has become the norm. But also expectations change, right? I mean, what used to be okay, I can order today, get my stuff 2 days later, is not okay anymore. I need to get it tomorrow. I need to get it today in 2 hours. And so you're constantly sort of, like you say, reinventing the business model to meet an ever-increasing customer experience demand. My last panelist, Reuben, founder of Polka. He's worked at Zalora for a few years. He's currently the e-commerce head in Southeast Asia. So you can see we've gone all the way from the West Coast to the East End with Reuben, who's currently heading the e-commerce division for Kellogg's and is based in Singapore. Reuben.
Okay, I think all the others pretty much covered all the big plus points of working in e-com. to add on, you definitely don't have to wear a suit to work every day. That's a big plus. But adding to that, I think if you're someone who loves to kind of like build something, and if you have that entrepreneurial mindset embedded in you, I think you'd love working in ecom. It's very reactive. Every decision that you make, you can see the effects of that either the same day or probably the next day when the products reach the consumers' houses. But adding to that, I think online shopping is set to grow even more in the future. I think India, like how Smrithi said, it's growing super fast. Southeast Asia is also growing super fast. The pandemic has been a bit helpful in that regard, so to speak. But I think this is going to be the future, right? At least most brands in Southeast Asia are thinking about how to get on the e-commerce wave. And these are not just electronics brands. You're talking about fashion. You're talking about like food brands like Kellogg's. You're talking about like beauty brands. Everybody's trying to figure out how to sell more online. So if you get into the space right now, I think it'll be quite beneficial for you. And start early, build a long-term career in this. And to add on to what Smrithi was saying, like, this space is also ever changing. So it's new every day, right? Like today you have shopping. Tomorrow you probably might have a live streaming of a fashion show on the platform, and you can shop straight off what people are wearing on that. Or you could have games interlinked with shopping. So these are the trends that come up. If you don't find those trends, you could pretty much spearhead those trends as well. So it's very new. I'm pretty sure you will not be bored a single day if you get into ecom. That's my take.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks, everybody. The one thing you guys did not talk about in detail is the financially rewarding part, and I'm sure there's a couple of pop-up questions that will come to you guys without you knowing what's hitting you, to tell us more about your ESOPs and all the money that's in the e-commerce space. Great. Okay, so thanks for that. I guess very well-rounded perspective on why should someone choose a career in e-commerce. There's a number of topics. I won't summarize now because I think we'll touch upon these at various points through the course of the next 60 odd minutes. But I'm going to move to our first section then, which is how does one get into e-commerce? And we'll cover the whole spectrum, right? We'll talk about campus recruitment. We'll talk about internship and campus, actually. We'll talk about lateral moves. Someone who's specialized in certain profiles who now wants to make a jump into e-commerce. Someone who's decided to take the startup route first after campus or is currently in a startup and now wants to jump into e-commerce. We'll try and cover the whole spectrum. But I'll get Smrithi in first here. So Smrithi, getting in from campus, how does a student get into an e-commerce major like, let's say, Flipkart from campus? What can students do during the 2 years to build the requisite skills?
Thanks, Aditya, for that. Over the last 5 years, I've been part of, I think, various panels. I mean, I've definitely attended conducted the IMK panel, but I've also visited a few other campuses. And while it may sound very cliched, right, but due to the nature of the business, because as I said, right, you need that kind of mental agility, right? We do need people who are original problem solvers, right? Who do not have, who don't have to be told every day, right, as to how to go about solving this problem. While there is help available, a lot of problems that we solve on a day-to-day basis have really no precedence, right? So we really need people who have a very strong independent viewpoint on consumer problems, right? And questions in panels could be around, what do you think about a fashion rental business? Probably it may be things that don't even exist today, right? But developing viewpoints on core consumer problems and having a thought process behind it, and at least some initial ideas on how it can be solved or whether it will work or won't work, right, is fundamental to growing or setting up someone well in the e-commerce space, right? So we look for that independent thought process in people, right? Apart from that, as we already discussed, right, a very strong passion for building for scale, right? Solving all your problems through technology is very, very important, and ability to think scale and not just about while thinking about pilots, but how do you really expand this to millions of customers, right? That scale thinking or that big thinking is a very, very important aspect, right? And finally, developing or it's a bit of an innate thing as well, right? As I said before, it is a choice that one will have to make. And interestingly, I'll just share this anecdote. I was interviewing with a dream FMCG major during my placements, and it was not ITC, because I finally did get into ITC, right? I didn't make it into the FMCG major, and it was only later I figured out from the HR that it was one question that derailed it, and felt like I didn't fit the culture there. While I was very sad about it then, later I realized, right? And the question was, there is a consumer launch, a large consumer launch in 2 weeks, right? And just now that the consumer insight on which that was based is a bit off, right? What would you do? Would you go ahead with the launch and methodically correct it later? Or would you abort the launch, or would you rectify it and then do the launch, maybe, quickly course correct and do it maybe 3 weeks or 4 weeks down the line? I said, absolutely. It makes sense to not do the launch, course correct, and even if it takes maybe a couple of more weeks, cram it and do it, right? It seemed like a very logical answer to me, but I didn't realize that it was not the answer that they were looking for. And cultures are different, companies are different, and more importantly, industries are different and in different growth phases, right? Only when I joined Flipkart did I realize that fit into this, right? And how we really sort of hustle and ensure that we do the right thing for the customer, and not just the right thing, do it within that time, right? And think out of the box and think on our feet, right? So that's my 2 cents.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Smrithi. And I relate to a lot of that as well. I guess, like you, I've been in a number of the sort of panels that have gone onto campus. I've tried to touch base with some of them, see what recruitment looks like. And there's one thing that we commonly ask at Amazon, which is, are we making is this a two-way door decision, or is this a one-way door decision? And a lot of times we've realized that in e-commerce, actually in a lot of industries for that matter, a number of decisions are two-way door. And I think specifically in the e-commerce space, given the nature in which that whole industry is growing, and I think, Smrithi, you've said, was it 10,000 times in India? Massive numbers, right? But I think if there was one profile or skill set that these companies are looking for when they come to campus, it's that ambition in people to jump on those two-way door decisions, right? If there is a decision to make, and if we know that what we can take this, if things go wrong, we can always take a step back, we'll cut our losses and come back. It's that nature in people, it's that sort of aptitude in people that we're looking for. I think when we go for campuses, because there isn't much time, room, space to really come, relax, go through a sort of 1 year learning journey. I still remember my 1 year learning journey in ITC as a assistant under training was phenomenal. The amount of learning I went through was crazy, but also the investment that the organization put behind me without expecting me to deliver much was also intense. And I can't imagine that sort of investment happening in the e-commerce space, because actually e-commerce is now, and now it's got to be invested now. So a lot of the profiles that we're looking for are people who can roll up their sleeves, sort of get their hands dirty, go on with their decision making. I'll bring in a slightly different sort of lateral perspective, and I know we've also got a couple of questions from the audience around how does one make a move from FMCG into this space and so on. So I'll try and bring that flavor in. So Ashish, if we can have you on the video. You've got a different profile as well. So from FMCG to sales in India, you made the move also from a sales role into Snapdeal. How did you make that move? And what were some of the portable skills that you could leverage when you made that move from firstly from the sales role into Snapdeal, and then subsequently into the startup and the international world as well?
Great. So just a course correction, actually. So I was not in FMCG. However, I was in the sales role. So when I moved to a startup in an era wherein the whole industry was on the steep learning curve. It was around 2012, everybody was learning on the go. And given the newness of the vertical, the skill set for lateral movement at least was not very technical or domain expertise based, but it was instead what our general MBA have already prepared us for. So before e-commerce, I was selling technical university courses, which was a far cry from what e-commerce companies do for business, right? So, however, during my formative 2 years, I figured out that this is the industry I'm definitely not cut out for. I do not want to get into this industry, remain in this industry. And there was an inherent pull towards the new industry which was shaping up. So I took up on myself to change the playing field actually, because I had no relevant work experience with the e-commerce. So I thought I would leverage my acquired skill, which was the art of selling, which I had honed since last 2 years. And instead of pitching myself as a prospective candidate looking for a job or applying for a job, instead of that, I started framing what they want and pitch for, let's say, something which can be leveraged by the company to either pivot or expand their existing business units. Now, with the traditional or the so-called MBA information of how to do the cold calling, etc., I had so many cold callings, met the founders, GMs, etc., of all the most of the early stage e-commerce company, pitching with a project which I thought may help them pivot. With each interaction, I was able to learn and understand more of the inner working, I would rather say, and nuances of the industry, and was able to perfect the pitch. Finally, after some persuasion, one of the co-founders, incidentally, whom I met at a Mumbai hotel lobby, he agreed to have that launch of the vertical, of the education vertical I was pitching for. However, after a few months, he gave me an idea of, let's say, launching another vertical within his own company, which I gladly took. However, what I clearly remember is the discussion which I had with him, wherein I openly asked about the skill set which he was particularly looking for. And I think his reply is still relevant today. He told me there are 5 key components which a potential candidate or a potential interested person should be equipped with in order to succeed in an e-commerce. And it was rightly touched upon by Smrithi as well as you, wherein the problem solving and critical thinking, which is specifically deals with the ambiguity, that if you have, let's say, not the right set of information or not the complete set of information, but still you have to go ahead and implement, you have to solve for that problem. How would you go about it? So it also ties to this his second point, which was continuous ability to learn and unlearn, challenging the status quo. Why is it like that? What can be better? How exactly can that be better? Can I do that? What else do I require? What can be the frugal mindset with which I can implement those ideas? So these ability to learn as well as unlearn the things which you have learned through your, let's say, MBA time or your experience or your previous work organization, that basically goes a long way. Apart from that, definitely having a strategic mindset and great at project management. It's as you guys were saying, there are so many things to be done in the industry. You have to strategically choose which option of the many are the best resolution for the problem which you are solving for. Fourth was, if I remember correctly, it was marketing not only yourself but also championing your idea both internally and externally, because you need team members to join in your cause. If you are going on a quest, you need your companions, you need your lieutenants, you need your generals, definitely, so that you can go ahead and solve for that big battle which you guys are preparing for. And of course the other soft skills like persuasion, grit, stress, time management, etc., which we all basically are used to. We never think that these are the skills which can be basically useful because we take it for granted. However, I definitely see that these few selected soft skill sets goes a long way in an e-commerce industry.
Super. Yeah. Thanks for that, Ashish. And I think those skill sets are actually pretty critical. The way you mention it also, because I don't think they are very relevant only for laterals, right? I mean, I think in my perspective, they are skill sets that absolutely one should think of nailing while they're also on campus, whether it's through the various sort of project opportunities, internship opportunities. But I think especially when you think of things like championing your ideas and marketing the work that you can do, project management in many ways. These are all things that I think people on campus can absolutely sort of nail. And in my view of sitting on the other side of the table and interviewing candidates, I think someone that brings this flavor, it's very evident, right? Because they talk a lot more passionately about the work that they've done and how they have tried to sort of put all of this into a really short time frame and so on. But no, thanks for that, Ashish. Very, very, very useful. Good. Let me bring the next person then. Actually, maybe I'll just do a follow-up with both Ashish and Smrithi here. If you had to choose, or if you had some advice to people in terms of best route to get into the e-commerce space, whether it's networking, referrals, looking up job postings on sites, where do you think people should be focusing their efforts and energy on?
So I would say networking would be number one, because see, there are a lot of roles in e-commerce that don't get posted, or a lot of roles that come up and get closed within like a couple of weeks, right? So a good network, or reaching out to the right people in the organizations, right, would help you sort of look for the roles that you would fit into. And actually, over the last 3-4 years, I myself have worked with quite a few IMK alumni, and they could be fairly like a 2-year experience or even an 8 years experience, right? And in those conversations, we figured out that the roles that they perhaps saw on LinkedIn is not the right role for them, but there is something else which would be perfect for them, right? I would say networking as my number one option.
Yeah,
Super.
while I also concur with what Smrithi was saying, on the other side of the table, it also makes sense, because whenever we are meeting with the potential hires, we are not, let's say, sticking to a script and trying to fit a person into a particular role, right? Instead of that, we try to basically figure out what exactly can he do or she do best. And hence, for me, I would rather say, of course, referral. And the second is basically the LinkedIn information, not only LinkedIn, but basically the third-party information on the company, what exactly they are trying to do, so that you can pitch as a potential hire instead of just applying to a templatized job profile. Let's go ahead and try to pitch to the thing which you are passionate about. And hence that would be the selling pitch of yourself. I would rather still say that doing a lot of research and pitching for what you definitely believe in should be the right way to go ahead.
Just adding on to that.
Go on, Smrithi.
Just adding on to that, I'll just share an example as well. Ronald, one of our alumni members, right? So he had reached out and connected me to one of our alumni from the 2017 or 2018 batch, was it, right? Very, very, very brilliant candidate, right? She was part of the Students' Council. She was, very, very good CV. She was with McKinsey, if I'm not wrong, right? And she was looking for a role for personal purposes. She had to relocate, right? She had applied to some other role, right? And that role didn't exist. But in my conversation with her, the first thing, as Ashish said, we evaluate is, we want good people in the organization, right? And how do we get in that great person into the organization? So I quickly spoke to a few people and created, or there was a role which was going to come up in 2-3 months. We accelerated it and brought her in, right? So these are the kind of things that generally happen, and
Yeah. And I'll probably break a myth here for some people, right? Which is, I think there was also a question in the audience around, is there too many FMCG people in the e-commerce space? And I think part of the reason, it's not because e-commerce loves FMCG or we think that profile is great. Part of the reason is really because that's where the network is super strong. I mean, when you get one FMCG guy in or person in, they sort of go out and reach out to their network of 5-6 people. And so that network tends to believe. But when I look at the Amazon sort of spurt in recruitment, it was FMCG for a brief period, and then suddenly there was a whole lot of telecom burst that happened, and then a lot of people from telecom came in, and so on. But thanks, guys. I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna try and get the rest of the flavor as well. So Manash, you moved from a digital product management role at Mastercard to a PepsiCo e-commerce profile. Tell us how you made that move, and again, talk to us a little more about the portable skill sets that you took over from Mastercard to PepsiCo.
Yeah, well, that was not a planned move, for sure. So I always call myself a accidental CPG guy. So, at MasterCard, I was doing some really exciting stuff, right? So I worked with Google, Apple, Samsung to launch Apple Pay, Google Pay, Android Pay. I was working with Uber, Lyft, Airbnb on quite a lot of those marketplace solutions. How do you do acceptance? How do you do fund transfer in developing countries? How do you use some innovations in that space? And from career trajectory, I was thinking that either I would stay in payments or I'll go into one of the tech giants. Uh, when PepsiCo reached out, right, I was very surprised. So PepsiCo reached out with the story that Indra Nooyi is planning to build out the entire e-commerce organization as a tech-focused organization, right? You would come in as the first guy, so you will have to create basically you have to build out the entire team, right, in a very short period of time. And the reason that you should come in is because we are expecting a huge spike in terms of how consumers are looking at CPG companies and CPG products, right? 2017, PepsiCo was generating 1% of its revenue from e-commerce. It was expected that by 2025, uh, almost 30% would come in from e-commerce, right? So huge shift was coming in terms of how consumers were looking at consuming products and discuss and sharing their experiences. So I took a leap of faith and decided to join the team and scale up the product management and product design team. So I always feel that from the product and design perspective, you're always trying to solve the consumer problem, right? You want to do it in a very short period of time, right? So use standard formats like lean software development methodologies, and the third is like you want to do it in a way that you can scale, right? You can build scrappy, but you scale for the future, right? So if you bring in those three domain experience, that experience is transferable across industry. The good thing was that I was also able to uh, leverage my experience in the digital payments and then leverage that in e-commerce. So if you look at e-commerce, I think we talked a lot about e-commerce in general, but I see e-commerce as five specific players, right? So the first players are definitely the large, let's say, retail or e-commerce players. You have Amazon, Walmart.com, Flipkart, etc. Right? So you have that in one bracket. Second bracket, you are looking at players like platforms, like so you have Shopify, BigCommerce, Magento, etc. Facebook and Google has also been trying to get into that space. The third players are niche, right? So niche players which are in the e-commerce space. Let me take the example of Rent the Runway, or that's a space where I think Smrithi talked about fashion retail, right? So that's in fashion retail, it's a niche area, and they have been leveraging e-commerce as a way of going to the consumers, right? Uh, so fourth is basically the traditional CPG companies which are now looking at e-commerce. You have Kellogg's, you have PepsiCo, you have Beckett Kaiser. All of them are saying that, okay, how do you build the direct connections with the consumers, and let's use e-commerce in order to build that direct connections. And the fifth is basically ecosystem partners, which play a very critical role, right? So examples are warehouse platforms like Channel Advisor. You have subscription platforms like Rickery, and you have loyalty and or payments, right? So those are the five key players in the e-commerce space. And when you look at shifting and making career and lateral moves, I do see people moving in those, typically in one of the roles in those five ecosystems. All those five players are investing a huge amount of uh, funding as well as focus in product design and engineering, in terms of building out their technology stacks, in terms of building out their technology capabilities. So it's a very exciting time for someone to look at those areas as lateral.
Super. That's super detailed, Manash. Thanks so much. I'll do a quick follow up from one of the questions that we've got. As you have recruited more people, I guess,
Yeah.
into the space, both at Mastercard but potentially also in PepsiCo, how can someone from a technical background, a non-IT background, transition into a product management role? Is there a specific skill set or a nuance that you look for in such transitions?
No, that's a good question. I think I've seen four specific career trajectory, right? So one is a lot of people work, let's say in digital marketing, supply chain, do their MBA and get into product management, right? So companies do tend to go to B schools in order to hire product managers. That trend has become quite dominant in the last, 5 to 6 years, right? So that's one way, and I'm sure IMK is a great place right now. We traditionally had a really good work streams around product management. The second is there are a lot of uh, lateral moves that are also happening within the organizations, right? So I have set up training programs, which we call as associate product manager programs, right? Where we train people who are interested in product management, but they don't have the skill sets to. Currently, they don't have the skill set to be product managers, right? So that trend was predominantly started by companies like Facebook, by Google, but that is also being adopted in a lot of other companies like Unilever, PepsiCo, in order to train people in product management. The third channel is that you have a specific domain experience. Let's say you're in digital marketing, you're in data, you're in supply chain, and you want to go into product management. Players like product schools, General Assembly, they have started very product management centric courses, right? And in talking to their CEOs, there's a huge appetite for that because quite a lot of people want to go into product management, but they don't want to go through an MBA in order to go into product management, right? So that's where accelerated 3 months, 4 months journeys are becoming more of a norm. And the fourth is if you are in product design, or if you are in design, or if you are in engineering, or if you are in business analyst, right? Some of your skill sets are transferable, and I've also seen people go from those roles into product management roles, right? So those are the four areas those are the four career trajectories where I've seen people move from different domains into product management.
Super. All right. Thank you. Thanks, Manash. Sumit, similar question to you. Given your sort of, again, very different experience coming in from data science and analytics at Mu Sigma into another e-commerce major, talk to us about your move and the skill sets that you brought on.
Sure, absolutely. So my time at Mu Sigma, where I worked as a data science consultant and practitioner, starting in Bangalore and then subsequently in Silicon Valley, it did expose me to problem solving across pretty much every industry vertical out there: retail, e-commerce, banking, insurance, telecom, and so on. Right? And more importantly, this allowed me to connect the dots across industries. So for example, there are problems which insurance and telecom have been like solving for decades that directly apply to, let's say, subscription e-commerce. A good example of that is customer churn. Right? And more importantly, my time at Mu also allowed me to build a network across many companies that definitely helped when I was exploring my next play after deciding to move on from consulting. And another thing I would add, I think somebody brought this up earlier as well, is if you work in a large organization, the internal network is also pretty important, and it can be a lot easier to make a lateral move internally, especially if you're trying to branch out into this field. You'll be surprised how willing companies are to invest in in-house talent and like coach people to kind of get into these new roles. Uh, Personally, I wanted to work in a fast-paced and a dynamic environment where I could apply both my business as well as my data skills to good use, and e-commerce fit that bill perfectly. And specifically Walmart, which operates across all facets of retail, and especially at the intersection of like brick and mortar and digital, was a pretty interesting choice. In terms of transferable skill sets, data-driven problem solving at scale is a highly portable skill set that applies to pretty much every industry that you can think of. And even today, if I look at where I'm hiring talent for my teams, it comes across industries like consulting, tech, retail, finance. It's pretty much like all over the board. So and I expect this to persist at least for the next few years. So there's still a lot of pathways to get into laterally into e-commerce. Thanks, Aditya.
Super. Thanks, Sumit. And finally, let's get Reuben in with the whole sort of startup flavor. Reuben, you had a startup first before you jumped into the e-commerce bandwagon in Thailand, I think. Tell us a little about that journey. But also, given the sort of FMCG flavor you bring in, I want to club this with a question we have from the audience around how easy or difficult would it be for someone from FMCG retail to get into e-commerce? So if you can give us a perspective on both of those, please.
Okay, Adi. Thanks for the question. I'll take the first one on first, on how I got into e-com in the first place. So It was right after IMK. I started up Polka. We launched in the market, and I was busy pitching on every investor to get funds raised for the platform, right? And on one of those pitches in Bangalore, every investor I met was betting big on ecom. Right? Everybody, pretty much, and people were asking me like, "How is this associated to ecom? Is it going to help consumers' problems while they shop?" I met with Rajanandan, who was heading Google back then at a NASCOM conclave. And he listened to my pitch and he said, this product could add a lot of value to people who shop online. I think you should partner with an e-commerce firm. Start small, come back when you have 1 million paying users, then we'll start looking at fundraising. And I was like, man, if everybody's talking about e-com, I really want to understand what this is about. And I started pitching to e-commerce companies. I couldn't get through to the big ones in India. So I started reaching out to smaller firms outside India. Right? And on one of those attempts, I got in touch with a friend of mine who was working at Lazada, which is a rocket internet-based company back then. This friend of mine was actually one of the exchange students at IMK. So continuing to stay in touch with your network, building that up is very important, right? So that pitch turned into an interview, and I took that as God's way of saying, Reuben, go work in this industry for a while, learn something, make a bit of money, and then we'll get back into startup world. Long story short, I was in Bangkok working as part of a 4-member team, which led the electronics category for Lazada. And we were looking after 6 markets, right? Lazada eventually got bought over by Alibaba in 2018 and is now one of the big firms in SEA. But looking back at my last 10 years, I would say, number one, build your network. To what Smrithi was also saying, right? You guys are in campus or fresh out of campus, continue to build your network. But there's a right way to do that. It's not always sending out emails to seniors and saying, "Give me a job." You need to learn how to build your network. That's very important. At least you get your interview shot through friends, right? And second, once you get there, showcase your drive. I think what most e-commerce companies value a lot is how you have that mentality to build. Almost everybody at Lazada had a very strong drive to build, whether it's building teams or building structures or the financial systems in place, or even building demand in a market. Right? So that's quite key. So if you can showcase these two, I think you'll have a way to get in. Adi, to your second question, right, on how FMCG guys can get into e-com. I'm guessing most of the guys who get into FMCG from campus are either working as an area sales manager or as a brand manager, or go up as a senior brand manager, right? Given COVID and given the pandemic, most FMCG brands are trying to beef up their online sales, right? So what you guys really need to understand is you working in an FMCG company have got valuable knowledge around how your distribution systems work, how sales works in the market, right? Use that and see if you can take a first step of building your commercial business of e-com within your company itself. So say if you're working in ITC, try and see if you can catch up a role of your e-commerce lead at ITC, where you work with your Flipkart and your Big Basket and things like that. Gradually, as you start working with these partners, they'll see how good you are. And then you can easily transition into the e-commerce company itself. I know a couple of close friends who worked in J&J, who worked in Mars, in Lego in Southeast Asia. They're all now brand heads for those categories in Lazada. So these are people who did not have an e-commerce experience as such. They kind of built that up within their own FMCG company and then kind of moved into their partner sites, which is your Lazada, your Flipkart, etc. So that could be an easy way to get it. I hope.
Super. No, that's useful. Yeah, thanks, Reuben. Thanks. I know we've taken a little longer with the first session, but I've also been taking down some notes, and I think it's an important one, right, to nail how one can get into e-commerce. And I think as I go through some of the summary notes, the key skill sets that people should be looking at building: problem solving, championing your own ideas, product management, scrappy solutions, but also scalable solutions. I think Manash said that, and Manash could so be sitting in an Amazon conference room and he'd be talking the Amazon language if he said that. Thinking about consumers first. I think a lot of the problems in most of these organizations are always thinking about how do we add value to the consumer. A few sort of PM specific inputs and traits there. And I think last but not the least, networking. Leverage your network. You could land up in a role, as with me, actually, I landed up in a role very different to the one I interviewed for. when I interviewed for Amazon, and that's only because of the network, really. So those are probably my big takeaways. Thank you, everyone, for your inputs to that question. I'm going to move on. I'm going to move to the next phase. Let's move on to, once you're into e-commerce, what opportunities are there? How does one look at career progression? So Smrithi, let's start with you then. Moving roles, how easy is it to switch roles within the organization? And more importantly, how does that affect career progression? I guess when I go back and look at ITC, it was fairly straightforward. You go from being a ASM to a branch manager to an RSM to an NSM and so on and so forth, either in the sales or in the marketing profile. But how does that stack up within the e-commerce world?
Aditya, that's a very, very pertinent question when it comes to e-commerce, right? Because the plethora of roles that can be done, right? Whether it is from a function standpoint, in the sense moving from a business role to a finance role to a marketing to product management, as Manash was talking about, right? Or on the other hand, moving across various businesses, because e-commerce firms are also looking at launching various new businesses, right? Like hyperlocal or food delivery or fintech, right? So the options are pretty much endless in the consumer internet space, right? A lot of it is about identifying the next big thing, or working with people who are identifying these next big things and putting yourself out there and taking risks on these, right? In fact, over the last 9 years at Flipkart, right, I've done about 7 roles, and 2 of these roles were in the forefront of turnaround attempts, right? Very, very, and in both times, right, I had put myself out of the comfort zone. And in fact, if I failed, right, it would have been an exit for me, perhaps, right? So a lot of it is about grabbing opportunities, right? But at the same time, you will really have to sort of upskill yourself for these opportunities, right? Just a case in point is, in the first turnaround attempt, I had moved to a business finance role, and during my B school days, management accounting was one of the subjects which I was not so interested in, right? So for this role, I really had to go back and brush up some of those fundamentals, right? And even moving to a marketing role, or currently the role that I'm doing, which is a fintech role, right? Understanding how the insurance industry works, or how the lending, fundamentals of lending is, and building credibility in those industries, right? It is a lot of effort, right? It's a risky business, but it's certainly rewarding, both intellectually and financially, I would say.
That's the first instance where you've admitted, Smrithi, about the financially rewarding part. No, I'm kidding. No, I would agree as well. And I think the biggest culture shock for me when I moved from traditional retail, FMCG, to Amazon was no one comes and says, Aditya, you got to pick this up, right? It's up to you. There is a business being discussed, there is a topic being discussed, and they're looking for an owner, and it's really out there for grabs in the most literal sense. And the person who jumps on it the first gets to sort of lead it. But also, like you say, a lot of times you take that leap of faith, and you have the organization behind you, and you have all the resources at your disposal, but it's kind of a make it or break it, and you make it, and it's great because you see the opportunities sort of multiply and triple after that. But yeah,
just a added point, Aditya, it's also very, very important to set the right team culture with people you work with, right? Because when you move to a new role, you do need people to work with you, right? And these are difficult problems, a lot of rigor, right? Unless you can build the right team with you, right, it becomes a problem. So that's one of the biggest secrets, I would say.
Super. No, thanks for that. Super. Manash, when I look at Amazon, I see a lot of my colleagues move horizontally, right? And to Smrithi's point, business to finance to product management, and a lot of times that move, including my move when I moved to London, wasn't necessarily a step forward. It was actually a step back, or half a step back. But when I look at the sort of 4 to 5 year span, it seems like accumulation of all of this sort of spearheads their careers ahead. What's your perspective on this, and what advice do you have for people joining e-commerce profiles but looking for career progression as their objective?
I think that's a very valid question. again, e-commerce, as we talked about, is a high growth area. It's extremely relevant for the customers, and it's also growing, right? Uh, and we talked about 5 areas which are relevant, or you can divide broadly the large organizations or even small niche organizations working, right? So you have large retailers, you have platforms like Shopify, as well as Facebook and Google. You have CPG companies which are looking at e-commerce. You have niche direct to consumer or B2B players, and the fifth is ecosystem partners. So what's happening is all these 5 areas are growing in different directions, and what they need is domain experience, right? So domain experience is something which is extremely important. Uh, if let's say if we are going into a technology solutions or you're building out technology solutions, right, and and you don't have the domain experience, it can be very detrimental, right? So people who are in supply chain opportunity or who have predominantly been in supply chain organizations, they can look at making a shift to supply chain in traditional e-commerce organization as a career shift. A case in examples are Amazon's and Walmart and PepsiCo. So we are building supply chain automation capabilities for direct store distributions, which traditionally means that people going to the stores and making inventory and then creating orders. How do you get the inventory from the shelves directly? How do you use technology like IoTs and stuff like that to figure out what are the where do you have overstaff, where do you have understaff, which are fast selling items, rather than people going to the stores and making list of those inventories. How do you use technology to solve them? That's an example where a lot of skills can be transferable. There are people who have worked in telecom or people who have worked in traditionally technology companies like Siemens or IBM. They can start saying that, okay, there is a requirement for my domain and my expertise in e-commerce space, whether it's a player like Amazon or Walmart, which are working, let's say, on IoT space, or it could be someone else, right? So again, you have multiple domains being transferred into e-commerce. And very quickly, I'll touch upon the other two. Second is um, like how do you uptrain yourself, right? So I've seen people who are in traditional strategy organizations coming into e-commerce and bringing their strategy flavors. And the third we talked about is technology is transferable across domains. I myself transferred my skill sets from payments into e-commerce. I do see a lot of people that I'm hiring. Majority of them haven't had e-commerce experience, but I'm getting them into the organization, training them, and now they are becoming much more relevant in the e-commerce journey. So I do see all those 3 trends being relevant.
Super. That's great. Yeah, thanks. I'll bring Reuben in now because I think, like you say, Manash, there are those 5 different verticals or areas within the e-commerce space, and I think a lot of them are also having a lot of startups. So Reuben, with your sort of startup experience as well, what kind of when and actually what kind of e-commerce startup would you advise that it makes sense to join, and what are the key considerations when evaluating such opportunities?
Okay, it's a tough one. Are you asking me whether people should join Amazon or Flipkart? But anyway, jokes aside, I think if you're getting into the specific industry e-com, whether it's fashion or groceries, each one has got its own set of opportunities to build on, right? But I would broadly look at 3, right? If you are an experienced professional, right, just ask yourself whether your industry knowledge could add value to building the e-commerce firm that you'll be joining, right? So if you are working in ITC, if you are thinking about joining a Big Basket, right, that could probably be a better transition than probably joining a Nika, which is more into fashion or that sorts, right? So ask yourself that question, see what kind of skills that you've learned in your current role as an experienced professional you can take back. Second, if you're starting off fresh out of campus, I would suggest that join the big names, so the Amazons or the Flipkarts, more from a learning perspective, because these firms have had their fair share of experiments. And like how Smrithi was mentioning, like 7 roles in the last 10 years, and building out some best-in-class processes, which is very valuable. You don't get to learn that if you join somewhere smaller. You could probably, but you have a better chance of seeing how it's done at the big boys and then going to a smaller company and building that up, right? And third is, this is very important, which is really try and understand the type of people that you're going to be working with. And this is a super fast industry where the work that you do and the deliverable that you do depends a lot on the team that you're working with. You need to be surrounded with people who are very confident, the sharks of the world who are not scared of taking big, bold bets, and super analytical people, right? So try and get a flavor of that before you kind of decide on which ecom to join. And most people would be worried if the ecom you're joining is going to be financially sound, whether you'll be able to raise the next fundraise. But if you actually join a company with smart people around, I don't think that's going to be a problem either. Right? So put a lot of emphasis on that as well. That's my take.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Reuben. I think especially the last point there around the type of people, I think is super relevant, because I've seen careers sort of break, and break is probably the wrong word, but definitely take a few steps back versus taking a few steps ahead, because the type of people and the culture is just not suited for that individual, and especially because the startup, and if you're I guess 8, 10, 15 years into your career, you have to go into the startup with the mindset that there are a few super young folks there taking a number of important decisions, and you've got to be open to letting them drive you, as opposed to you going in there with a sense of, hey, I'm more experienced and more senior, etc. Right? But because I think that's where the sort of real progress happens. Super. Thanks, Reuben. I'll get Ashish in as well. Ashish, again, you've had an interesting sort of snap deal to international e-commerce and now into Amazon Web Services. What have helped you in each of these transitions, and what's the one thing that sort of stuck out for you as the decision maker during these transitions?
Yeah, so it was I would rather say an inherent decision made for us, because we moved to Middle East to start a new horizontal e-commerce company with Rocket Internet. And it gave its own highs and lows, actually. So it was exhilarating once we raised the largest Series A in the region, but it was saddening as well when the external circumstances were not favorable and we had to sell it to the largest regional family business. Though through my references, through my discussion, through my networking, I was in touch with the largest e-commerce player in the geography, which was Souk, which later got acquired by Amazon. I joined over there. And between both these transitions, what kept us going, or basically what helped me, was basically let's say the top 5 soft skills which were garnered over the years, right? Which is essentially understanding of what, and more importantly, why. So understanding the what piece is really required. What you're doing, why exactly you are doing it, how exactly to do it in a better way. It helps you to demystify the trend which you are looking at, and also to help the customer, because everything boils down to helping the customer. How exactly can you alleviate the problem which he's facing, or how exactly can you solve for a better customer experience? The second and foremost, which was helpful, at least for me, was the ability to ingrain the startup DNA. Now, what we define it is basically to, let's say, act or think like a owner, but work like a slave. Effectively means that it means that you can be thrown into a situation which you are not aware of, which you have to think through and have, let's say, a 5-year plan made for it. However, you alone have to chalk out all the details, and you have to work your, let's say, 24 hours or 22 hours even to get that rolling in the first go. Third is basically genuine interest in what you are doing. So if you're disinterested in what exactly will be the impact, or basically what you are doing, it might not be helping in the long run. So if you're taking a project, basically have a very genuine interest in what you're doing, and have the ability to get informed about the things around it. So if you're, let's say, pivoting to a particular business line, you have to know what is going on. You have the ability to be kept informed, as well as you have to be at the center of the storm, I would rather say, the eye of the storm, so that you can withstand all the changes around you. And through the continuous learning, which was mentioned by the other panel members as well, that you are upgrading yourself with a skill which is required, which is must, or which are just nice to have, so that you can just circumvent all these issues which may seems too much at the beginning, but then basically eventually it fades out. And definitely I would basically add that you have to be ready for the new challenges always, because this industry is very fast paced. Every now and then there is a new vertical coming up, there is a new technology coming up, there is a new business problem to be solved. So you need to be ready for the challenge and you have to adapt yourself to it. So adaptability becomes also another one. So effectively just saying that what's next, let me do that. That mindset, just grab the opportunity which you were mentioning, that there are so many options, you have to just go and grab it, right? These traits have helped me switching internally between Amazon as well. So since last 4 years at Amazon, I have basically switched at least 3 times, and every time I was learning new things, even from, let's say, the technical standpoint or from business standpoint or from soft skills perspective, was learning and continuous unlearning the old things as well.
Got it. Super. Thanks, Ashish. And I'll quickly get the data or the analytics perspective as well. So, Sumit, I guess when I look at any decision being taken in the e-commerce space, and you spoke about a couple of the big topics there, subscription e-commerce being one of them, and so on. But the relevance of data and analytics in today's environment is even more crucial than before. Talk to us about maybe one or two sort of key trends and traits in that industry, but also how is sort of career movement viewed in the space of the data analytics sector, but within e-commerce?
Sure, absolutely. So as you all know, right, this field is extremely dynamic. At the same time, there is hyper competition. So as a result, data and data science are very, very pivotal to the success of any e-commerce company, because anything you do, you have to design for scale. So any decisions you're making, they have to be done at scale. So that's where data science comes in, right? So data does occupy an extremely elevated role in the org, which informs decision making pretty much across the entire spectrum. It's literally at the level where we know that there are decisions to be optimized. It's just a matter of bandwidth getting to them. If you look at some of the new age e-commerce companies like Stitch Fix, they are built entirely around the data science foundation. In fact, data science reports directly to the CEO at Stitch Fix. For me personally, right, like being at the intersection of data and business has been my superpower. My background in computer science allowed me to pick up data science skills fairly quickly, which then combined with MBA does give you a huge edge, especially in this business, because just having one or the other doesn't really play out, because you do have to be able to speak the language and be able to perform in the moment. If you think of some common decisions, right, like really fundamental stuff, right? How much can I invest in acquiring a customer, right? Should I double down on an existing business experiment, or should I stop it right away and pivot onto something else, right? Like data plays a huge, huge role, and like it's pretty much every single day. So as long as you can operate fast, you can like one thing we say is like, as long as you quickly get to the least bad option, because there is no perfect option out there, right? You would do well in this field. Thank you.
Got it. Got it. Super. Again, the insights I take away, guys, are the opportunities are endless within this space. It really sits with the individual to grab some of those opportunities. Now, whether it's product management at one end, data science at the other end, finance, and again, I'd link back to a couple of the sessions from the past around product management and supply chain. But these roles and most e-commerce organizations are open to people making these switches between roles, and so it's about leveraging your networks even within the organization, understanding what roles are open. A lot of times these roles go away pretty quickly, so you want to constantly be sort of in the know of which business is the next rising part of the organization, or which role, and be able to move to them. But the opportunities are immense. The advantage we have with today's panel, like I said earlier, is we've got everybody from the US all the way to the far east. So I want to bring the whole group back in, and maybe each person go about telling us what are the hottest skills in demand in e-commerce in your region, and maybe one quick tip for someone looking to move to your place. So again, I'll start with maybe Sumit, and then we go further east from there.
Sure. So I would say, right, it might sound very mundane, but again, adaptability and practical problem solving at scale. I would say like this is like really, really like the fundamental skill that you need to have, right? And this will remain hot regardless of like how many years out we look at least for the next 5 to 8 years. I don't see that changing, right? The essence of e-commerce remains pretty much the same. Like you have a shopping cart, you have a product, you're buying. but how that order manifests itself, that is constantly evolving. Like new streams are opening up and new ways are being evolved, right? So being able to keep pace with that is going to be critical. And lastly, people who can excel at more than just one thing, right? There is like a huge demand for that skill set. Like if you're good at an intersection of fields, that like straight away differentiates you. Like for example, a finance professional who is data literate, or a product manager who is data literate, right? Like that straight away like would put you in like the top 1% of applicants. Okay.
Super. Manash, from a New
Sure.
York perspective.
New York perspective, I think, which is across US and I think global also. The three roles which are seeing a huge spike in demand is engineering, data science, and product, right? Because I mean, in e-commerce, everyone's trying to build out technology capabilities in order to scale, as well as personalize the experience for consumers, right? And hence those three roles have a very big impact. Interestingly, in terms of domain, the things that I'm seeing being quite active is like, how do you reach out to customers, right? How do you attract the customers? How do you fulfill the customer's need, right? And how do you build platforms, right? So platform we talked about. Things which are becoming very interesting in like how do you reach out to customers is like Amazon, Walmart, all of them are building their own advertising platforms, right? And that is becoming the new normals in terms of reaching out to the customers. A lot of brands are shifting their advertising dollars from Facebook and Google to Amazon search, Walmart search, and all those platforms. So suddenly, the people who have insights and capabilities in those domains have becoming extremely critical for the success of both D2C as well as B2B.
Super. I'll go with a London perspective, I guess. It's interesting because I was going to say I think one of the hottest profiles here in London is probably still the sales and business development roles, and actually probably through across most of Europe for a couple of different reasons. Because one, the sector that's really booming, I think, in the Europe is the B2B e-commerce space, and that's not one we've covered in a lot of detail today, because I guess e-commerce is very, very synonymous, and we're still scratching the surface when it comes to B2C. But there's definitely a lot of evolution in the B2B space, and B2B not just from a pure product sales perspective, but actually from a whole host of service related sales, right? Whether it's pay, finances, transportation, logistics, and so on and so forth. The peripheral industry that we will talk about in the next exit option section, there is still a huge scope there for sales and business development profile, which I think is becoming more and more relevant. Manash stole part of my thunder also when he said a lot of the cost centers are now revenue centers in themselves. I mean, whether it's advertising slowly going away, transportation slowly going away, and so on. Each of these are separate business entities in themselves, and each of them need their set of product management profiles and their set of data science profiles and so on. And again, given the nature in which the European market today is, with Brexit, with COVID, with a whole bunch of challenges, a lot of these are now almost resetting themselves in how do we scale in the next 3 to 5 years and cope with the new challenge. So for me, that's probably what's most relevant in the EU. Ashish, next with Dubai.
So for Middle East, which is definitely undergoing the huge e-commerce transition, but is a little behind India in its growth stage, the top three picks for me would be definitely product management, specifically related to the payment segment and the customer experience. The second would be the business development side, which you also mentioned, specifically around the omni-channel retail and bringing in more international choices to customers. And the third would be marketing, specifically around social commerce and influencer marketing. The next two which I can choose is basically the analytics and data sciences, as well as procurement and supply chain.
Super. Great. Okay. And Smrithi.
Aditya, thanks for the tip on sales and BD still being relevant in.
Always.
But in India, I would say a lot of things are changing every year, right? And as Ashish was saying, social commerce, hyperlocal, fintech, right? A lot of these industries have evolved over the last year and a half or so, right? So from a industry standpoint, some of these sub industries are really booming, right? And one's ability to really start shifting into these or think about these from a consumer perspective becomes important, right? But purely from a functional role standpoint, I would say product management and data sciences has been quite scarce over the last couple of years. In fact, we ourselves have gone to San Francisco, Seattle. We acquired a company in Israel just for data sciences. We were exploring in Shanghai, etc. Right? So data sciences has definitely been a scarcity, and so is product management, I would say.
Sumit's thinking, what's happening with these guys? All right, and finally, then the East, Reuben, tell us more about what's happening there.
So in Singapore, I mean, we're looking at 6 different markets, right? So I think that every function's got openings, right? So sales and BD is still number one because every brand is trying to see how to beef up sales online. But I'd like to take a slightly different flair and kind of suggest on few skill sets that you need to build up on, right? So I think one is, if you're getting into the space, you really need to know how to do your commercials. So your commercial know-how should be important. Like how Smrithi said, brief up on your Manac and your financial subjects. I still have a textbook of, there you go, economics of strategy still on my desk. So I refer to this every time I'm stuck. So you should basically know how to run a P&L, right? So that's quite important. Digital marketing is another skill that is very hot in the market. Data analytics. The thing about data analytics is because of COVID, a lot of e-commerce companies are setting up shop in Bangalore. So if you are in India and you want to work for a Southeast Asian company, but still very patriotic that you don't want to leave the country, you can look at that option. But with Southeast Asia, the other skill set that you need to figure out is stakeholder management. You're going to be looking at 6 different markets. Probably your investors or your management is going to be sitting in one of these markets. How do you keep them in the loop? Knowing what matters to them and highlighting that is a key. So, I mean, these are the skill sets that I would say is very important for a career in Southeast Asia.
Super. Thanks, all of you. I'm going to quickly move on to our maybe the penultimate section, which is exit options. E-commerce is not a one-way door. You can get out of e-commerce and you can land up with some fancy jobs and fancy career profiles, even when you think of exiting. So maybe, again, a quick round robin to each one of you. If you had to exit e-commerce today, what role or what industry would you look for? And this time, let's go the other way around. So, Reuben, I'll start with you.
So I wouldn't really exit e-com as a function because I'm madly in love with this function. So for me, there are a couple of exit options. One is internal within the company. So where I can grow into a e-commerce lead for a larger region like APAC or probably even shift regions and lead e-commerce for the company in Middle East or in the US. Obviously, when you go to the US or China, the scale of operations is much bigger than Southeast Asia. So that'd be a bigger thing. Working in an FMCG company like Kellogg's, you also have a lot of visibility to how the offline business works. So moving into a marketing director role or a managing director, and eventually growing up to being the CEO of the company is pretty much possible, right? There are a lot of brands which have, appointed the CEO of the companies as the ones who are heading e-com, right? Because e-commerce is becoming such a big, especially for fashion brands, electronics brands, these are becoming very relevant, right? So those are the paths that I would see for myself.
Smrithi? I can't, Smrithi, I can't think of you leaving Flipkart forever. So I think we should move on. No, I'm kidding. Go for yours.
See, as Reuben said, I'm really in love with e-commerce, right? And honestly, that's because I think Jeff Bezos says it's always day one, right? So in e-commerce across the world, I would say it is still day one, right? There's so much to do. There's so much to solve. So I don't see myself exiting this. But if I were to, I would go into fintech because I think that is where e-commerce was 9 years ago in India, at least, right? So exciting space. That's what I would look at.
Absolutely. Ashish?
Yeah, so I'll also echo the same sentiment. This segment is super exciting and definitely have no plans or thought about leaving this. However, again, if I have to choose, definitely I'll try to start my own business, but related to the e-commerce itself. I definitely see that the core e-commerce companies require the support of the entire ecosystem, and there's still a lot of scope which, if you can identify a real problem and work towards its solution, even now when people are claiming that the industry is oversaturated, I can still see there are so many real life problems which can be solved, and hence the need or requirement of the fringe startups, right? So just off the bat, at least I can think of opportunities in, let's say, the bigger segment of what to sell. We're typically asking for building a consumer brand. So look what, let's say, Gymshark or Boat or Anchor or Parrot have done in their own respective segments. So definitely with changing consumer demands, there are niches which can be played. There is a lot of room for the startups over there. I would also basically think of, let's say, how to sell. So specifically, which I was talking about, the social commerce part, the influencer commerce part, the gamification part, which Manas and Reuben were also talking about a little bit. How exactly to sell the product in a new way is something which the companies, which the new startups can definitely help with. Uh, I can also think of, let's say, a company wherein I can assist in the customer experience. Let that be pre-sales, which is basically talking about, let's say, interactive content or helping choose the right product, or during sale, which is solving for the frictionless and device agnostic shopping experience, subscription, etc. Or post-sales, like let's say, for example, after sales support, return, exchanges, etc., etc. There are so many things which can be done in this segment as well. And again, even if not within these, but there are so many other, let's say, part which you can be still a part of the overall ecosystem. Let's say, for example, solving for selection, delivery, payment, omni-channel, seller support, international logistics, disposal, etc. There are so many things to be choose from. So definitely, if given an option, I may start a startup in either of these.
Wow, you just opened up the plethora in the peripheral space, Ashi. That's amazing. Manash.
All right. So very quickly, in terms of roles, global roles, chief product officer roles or senior VP roles is going to be potentially the exciting exit options. In terms of domains, echoing Smrithi's point of view, fintech remains in really exciting opportunities along with B2B commerce. Right? We didn't touch about B2B commerce, but that's an area which I feel personally is going to get disrupted in the coming years, and it's open for 5x or 10x growth, right? So that's a domain which would be interesting. And then I love solving interesting challenges. So going to an industry or a place where I get an opportunity to get challenged and solve some interesting problems. Right? So those are the three.
Super. And Sumit?
I think Smrithi summed it up perfectly by saying that it's still day one in e-commerce, right? And if you think about e-commerce, it's fundamentally a customer-centric business, right? And companies are constantly looking for ways to serve additional needs, leveraging the relationships that they have already invested in. And that's how most of the companies will eventually end up making money in e-commerce. Companies who are not able to figure it out are going to collapse. Now, as a result, if you think about large companies like Walmart, new opportunities keep opening up very frequently, right? So for example, as somebody called out, advertising is always the logical next step once you have a critical mass, payments, financial services, marketplaces, right? So literally you can think of multiple startups kind of like opening up within the org, right? Pretty much like every 3 to 6 months. So that does open up like plenty of exit opportunities within the organization. In terms of specific roles, like we see people moving into BizOps, finance, product marketing, advertising, and so on, like even from a data science space, because as part of working in data science, you do end up like building that deep domain expertise in the business functions that you partner with. So that does give you those exit options, especially if you have a business background. And overall, plenty of exit options even outside, right? Like if you think about direct to consumer, right? Or pretty much like every company that's trying to kind of like figure out its e-commerce strategy. So at least for the next 5 to 8 years, like I don't see any shortage of exit opportunities, regardless of like where you are in the space.
Got it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. That's clearly a number of opportunities there. I think the one thing that stood out to me is the undying love of this entire panel to e-commerce. And I must say to the audience, it's not just the undying love, right? I'm sure there's some ESOPs and stock options, all of that entangled here. Nobody wants to quit before they make their money, clearly. But no, I'm kidding. I would say the perfect summary is it still is day one. There's so much more in this space. So definitely exciting. I'm going to quickly jump to our last round then, the rapid fire round. I'm super excited. a quick question to each of you, actually, a couple of quick questions to each of you, and then we'll see how quick you guys are at responding as well. So Manash, product management in banking versus product management at FMCG, what is the one big difference?
So product management in banking and fintech in general is much more evolved. And it has been ongoing for quite some time. FMCG, they're just starting into digital product management. So a case in example, current CEO of MasterCard, Michael Meeback, was the chief product officer, and I and a lot of the product organizations were rolling up to him before he became the CEO, right? Whereas if you look at FMCG, you don't see any of the CEOs who have come from a technology background. All of them have come from marketing, sales, business development, those kind of backgrounds. So it's still a lot of room for growth for FMCG.
Got it. I'm going to push you guys faster now. Sumit, what do you think will be the hottest skill set in e-commerce in 5 years from now?
I would say adaptability and rate of learning, right? That will still stay the hottest skill set, because there is so much of we don't know what we don't know in this space.
Got it. Reuben, what do you like most about your job or the e-commerce space, and what's the thing you like the least?
Okay. What I like the most is growth, how fast it is. Watching sales on my dashboard is fun day in, day out. I also love my team, a great bunch of people that I work with. What I don't like about my job, or at least what I did not like about my job before, was the travel. 6 countries every week is a pain. But thanks to COVID, that's not there. So yeah.
It's going to start soon, hopefully. Smrithi, what's the one thing you love about the Big Billion Day, other than obviously the sleepless nights?
Smrithi, you're on mute.
I'm sorry for that. Yeah, the way it actually brings the whole organization together, right, for the cause of giving customers a phenomenal experience. Actually, that is more potent an employee engagement initiative, even more than the famed ESOPs, right? So that is my best part about Big Billion Days, and of course, having a formidable competition, spices up.
I'm sure. And Ashish, India or abroad, what would you choose and why?
So I see this as a choice between huge market versus faster innovation, or experimentation versus relentless execution. So personally, for me, I'll choose abroad just for the newer perspective, focus on innovation and execution.
Got it. Okay. Do we have time for? Let's keep the answers super short. I'll try to squeeze in one more quick rapid fire to each of you. Then Manash, one example of a big risk you took that you think went really well.
Moving to PepsiCo was a big risk. CPG was a new space. I was the first guy in, but seeing the kind of growth, it paid well.
Super. Sumit, if you weren't in e-commerce, where would you be?
Given I'm in Silicon Valley, the logical answer is tech. That's just the law of probability.
AI. Startup, Reuben, startup to big organizations or the other way around? Which way would you recommend?
I think eventually building out startups in big organizations. That's the way I would look at it.
Awesome. Smrithi, which profile would you pick out as one of the best profiles in Flipkart? And don't say it's your profile.
No, it's I would say, any profile where you're starting up a new business, right? Whether it is we're doing B2B now, we're doing fintech now. Super exciting. Fold your sleeves and get to work. Those are the best ones.
Okay, very good. Smrithi, Ashish, right? Okay. I'm contemplating whether I should go for this or not, but let's go for it, right? E-commerce is synonymous with ESOPs. What factor did that play in your decision making?
So I think it's basically a balance between risk and reward ratio, actually. So definitely higher risk will give you higher reward. However, you need to be cognizant of the fact that there are a few of the, let's say, hurdle check which you need to do before getting into that. So for me, if you will rather say, it would be a mix between these two.
Got it. Super. That brings us to the end of the rapid fire. I'm just trying to see if I can squeeze in a couple of maybe audience questions here. I see, and I'm not going to direct this at anyone. So any of you feel free to pick this up. But one of the questions I see is these days there are a lot of online courses, even from some of the Ivy League schools. How valuable are these courses for a person trying to get into e-commerce? Who wants to have a go?
I can talk about that. Yeah, so I can probably do a quick one. So yes, there are a lot of valuable courses, domain-specific courses in technology, I think are relevant. However, learning from job when you are in advertising or marketing, I think is the best way of advertising, marketing, supply chain. Those are basically gets you the best experience.
Got it.
I would
Anybody
add to
else?
that, it's if it's like practical skill sets, yes, definitely those courses do add value. If nothing else, it's like it does add some signaling that okay, you are kind of learning things and you're like being proactive about it. But this is just one of the things I would say. Networking and like figuring out like how you can fit in. I think that was more important than that.
Just adding on to what Sumit was also saying, it's not just the courses online. There's a lot of content online which can teach you about how people shop in different countries. That's important to know. Like people in Singapore love going to shops and malls. People in the Philippines love the Lakers, etc. Understanding that will help you identify what kind of opportunities to kind of unlock these markets. So it's not just the courses from Coursera, but just keep reading on consumer behavior. That helps quite a bit.
Awesome. Maybe again a round robin, but one piece of parting advice from the panel for anyone who wants to build a career in e-commerce. So, Reuben, you want to go?
Go for it, guys. It's the best career out there. It's fun. You'll not get bored, and the rewards are good. So go for it. Don't think twice about it. That's gonna be the future. So yeah.
Ashish?
I'll also concur. Basically, just be in the eye of the storm always and keep your head firmly fixed.
Awesome. Sumit?
I would say optimize for the rate of learning and building optionality. Basically, try out many things, right? Like in e-commerce does give you the option to do that. Don't just kind of like stay in one place if you get into e-commerce.
Manash?
I would say try to get a global experience. I think that's really helpful in your career. From IMK, I went to Singapore, Philippines, London, New York, and I found my experience really valuable. So something like that would be very critical for your career growth.
Smrithi?
Be open to learning. Keep your ears open to consumer problems all the time across the world.
Awesome. And I'll say it's day one. There's so many opportunities, guys. Don't miss the boat now. Jump on it if you can. But no, it was lovely speaking with you guys. I mean, this session was as informative for me, as hopefully the others listening and seeing this have felt. But a lot of valuable inputs there. Thank you so much. I know, Reuben, it's 11 o'clock now for you. Thank you for joining us. It's early in the morning for a few others, but it was great to have you in this panel today, all of you. And I hope the viewers enjoy watching this both live as well as later. Thank you all and stay safe.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank